I'd like to say hello and thank you all for joining us. My name is Bradley Butler. I am the Executive Director and Curator at Main Street Arts, which is located in Clifton Springs, New York. Thank you for joining us as we chat with 4 of the artists in our current exhibition, Biblio Spectaculum, which is a national juried exhibition of 33 artists from 12 different states. Each Friday at 5 p.m. throughout the month of July, we'll be streaming live to Facebook with 4 different artists from the show and getting to know a little bit more about them and their work. We think it's a great way for you to know about the work that's being done from artists around the country who are utilizing artist books or text as part of their practice. And I think personally, it's just a great way to spend a Friday evening. So tonight we are joined, or I'm joined by Fern Apfel from Kinderhook, New York, Mariana Baquero from Gainesville, Florida, Haig from Brooklyn, New York, and Beth Lee from Bozeman, Montana. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We'll start by having each of you introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your work and your art practice, any kind of things about your background you'd like to share, and then we'll go back through and you each get a chance to go more in depth about work that's included in the show. And we'll also give people at home a chance to see that work in person. We'll do a screen share so you can see the artwork. If anyone has questions out there, please type them in the comments and we'll ask those as we go along. And also don't forget that you can see this exhibition for yourself. You can make an appointment if you're in the area to visit the gallery on a Wednesday, Friday, or Saturday. You can do that by going to mainstreetartscs.org, or you can visit interactive.mainstreetartscs.org to scroll through the exhibition, and it's the second best thing to being here and walking through it. You can scroll through to see the artwork as it's actually installed in the exhibition. We took pictures of each spread in all of the books, so you can actually click through and see what's on each page. So you can engage with that as well online. So first up, we'd like to talk with Fern. So Fern, take it away and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and whatever else you'd like to share with us.
Thank you. So I'm Fern Apfel, and I worked with text for years and years. And even though I'm a visual artist, growing up, the written word was revered. It was always thought to be the highest art. I'm a big reader. I worked in a library for many, many years. So I spent years actually painting the outside of books. And I when I first started with collage, when I first worked with text, I started with collage, and I used to collage the text and cut out words from old books and in many cases create my own stories. So it was a combination of a little bit of writing and a little bit of art. And I did that for years, and I spent a year doing contemporary illuminated manuscripts with text. And I was represented by a gallery in Hudson, New York, which is south of where I live. And the galleryist said to me at one point, everything was done on museum board and framed under glass. And he said, you need to come out from under the glass, the protection of the glass, we're missing things and whatever. So I started working on wood panels instead of collage, I started working with acrylic paint and pen. And it was exciting, and it opened up a whole new world for me, really, because I had so much more control than using other people's words. And at that point, I started collecting. I had been collecting old letters, envelopes, all kinds of written material for years. And so the work that I'm showing in Clifton Springs, it comes out of that new series. And I am usually drawn to the visual about something, some letter, the type, whatever it is. And then when I'm transposing it, I start reading it, of course, and you discover all kinds of, you get very involved in someone's life that might have been 100 years ago. I tend to love old, tattered, worn things generally across the board. And so anyway, and then as I start working, I start thinking about what is it that I want to put in, and what is it that I want to leave blank. So those are very conscious choices. And it's something about what we choose to remember, what we don't want to think about and choose to put aside, to kind of cast away. And in putting these letters and envelopes and all kinds of other keepsakes of daily life, I am also trying to form some kind of abstract composition. So I've been starting to realize that my work is a combination of what is abstract and what is narrative, actually. So mostly those things don't necessarily go together, but I have realized that's what I'm doing. I'm putting those things together. And as I work, I tend to discover things about what I am doing. And the work also is, last week's talk, Sue O'Donnell was saying a lot of things that I think about myself. So that was kind of fun to listen to her in particular. And she was saying, and it's so appropriate for my work, is that what our past informs our present. And I think she used those exact words. So thank you, Sue, if you're listening. And so, you know, we're all a mesh. Everything is a mesh of what was before and what is now. And you kind of can't escape that. And I'm not sure what else to say right now.
I think that's the thing that I realized last week, is how how connected everything is. I mean, this exhibition is so varied in media and, you know, what things look like. But I think I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that there are text and words, you know, throughout each of the pieces, so that brings a commonality to them beyond the visual. I think, you know, it. I guess it's hard to put my finger on it, but maybe at the end of tonight we'll be able to get closer to that. But
Right.
It is interesting that there's more in common than just what's on the surface with a lot of the people in the show. So I think that's great. So well, great. Well, thank you, and we'll hear again from Fern in a little bit here. And so now we'll go to Mariana.
Hi. So I'm Mariana Bacaro. I'm a ceramic artist, actually. And I live in Gainesville, Florida, currently. It's very hot here. I make functional work. So my pieces are the cups. And actually ceramics is my second career. I took a pottery class at our campus community studio when I was an undergraduate here at the University of Florida. And I fell in love with clay at the time, but I was a political science major and I went on to law school and I worked as a lawyer for a few years. And then eventually I decided that I wanted to connect with people in a different way. And I kept thinking back to that time in the pottery studio and the connections I made with people there. And so I went back to school, developed a body of work, ended up going to grad school in ceramics, again at the University of Florida. And graduated with an MFA in ceramics. And I ended up getting a job at the very ceramic studio where I took my first pottery class. So it was this like kind of cycle that the universe was telling me this was the right thing to do. So that's where I am physically right at this moment, is in that studio where I took my first class. And I work there as a teacher and I help to run the ceramic studio there. And so for me, we talk about connectedness and connection. That the whole purpose of my art practice is connection, is making connection with people. through the things that I make. And I make these objects that people use on a daily basis in their house. You know, they have really intimate connections with these objects. They use them to eat and drink. They have them hanging around their car. They root for them in their dishwasher, things like that. They're on their bedside table at night. So those are the kinds of objects that I make. And I make those objects because I feel like they give me that kind of connection with the people who use them. And I'm deciding what those objects feel like. I'm deciding what the handles feel like. I'm deciding what the lip feels like when somebody brings a cup up to drink out of it. I'm making those kinds of decisions. And so I feel like I'm having this intimate connection with someone that I don't know. And it's something that happens over a period of time. So it's almost this like kind of time travel experience that I really love. I love that sense of connection, somebody using an object that I'm making. And so the text comes into it mostly because of clay being this kind of really archival material. You can go into a museum and see pieces that are 20,000 years old. And the text to me is language, obviously, but also the forms of the pots that we use are a type of language. Everybody eats and drinks. And so a cup is a cup across culture. And so that is another form of language. And so I like this idea of combining these two different forms of language together and making this idea of story permanent and archival. And so that's the basis of the kind of work that I do in ceramics and where text comes in.
Great. And, you know, I think that ceramics is the area or field in which people say, like, I just fell in love with it. You know, it's like, I feel like I hear that the most about ceramics for sure. Just like that tactile experience. I don't know, it's just something about putting your hands in wet clay that people just, I think if you're meant to work with clay and you touch it, whoa, it's over, right?
There's a body knowledge involved for sure. I think that where your body, you know, either has an affinity for it or not. I've taught classes where someone put their hands on the clay and then got up and left. They just couldn't take the sensation of it. So it can go either way. But yeah, I do feel that I see that people have a connection to the tactile quality of it and the feeling of it for sure. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you. And we'll hear from Mariana again shortly. And Molly, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hello. I'm Molly. I'm an artist and graphic designer. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan originally, but I've been based on the East Coast for almost 10 years now. Like everyone here, I'm really interested in language and text, and I'm also interested in that from the perspective of literacy and how we learn to read. I started being interested in this when I was really young, and I went to a school where we learned reading later than was conventional in the US. So I've always been curious how that affected me. And then I'm also from a family of very smart dyslexic people. So it's always been a thing in my mind where I think about how am I seeing this word and how is it being perceived differently by someone else, or how are they having a different experience with it? So in college, I studied psychology at Yale with a focus in early childhood development and early literacy. And then I worked as a literacy tutor in Boston Public Schools for 2 years. And then I went to Boston University to get my MFA in graphic design, which is like sort of a change in tracks. But as I started to be more introspective about the kind of work I was doing as a designer, I realized that it was still consistent with the interest in text and literacy and how we perceive language. After grad school, I worked as a graphic designer at Harvard Art Museums for a year, and then I moved to New York and freelanced in New York, and also worked for a little design studio in Irvington. And I recently moved away, maybe temporarily, because New York's not the best place to be right now, New York City at least. But I still work for the little studio in Irvington, and I have time to do my personal projects. So this strand of like text and reading and literacy is one thing that informs a lot of my choices and what I explore. Another thread that goes into it is that I have a background as a dancer, and I'm always interested in bodies and movement and systems. And I think I'm really influenced by having absorbed a very specific system of movement and placement. And I think that pops up in interesting ways when I start projects and as I work through things. And then the last thing I wanted to share about my process is that it's very open-ended. I think maybe this is going at things from a design perspective, but I often start without knowing what the final solution will be to what I'm making. I'm often inspired by something from the outside world. In the case of this show, my piece is based on a poem by Gertrude Stein, but sometimes I'll find objects or books or other concepts or pieces of language. And a lot of my process is thinking through how to translate them or how to share what it is that I think is worth being shared about them.
Great. Yeah, I like what you said about perception early on when you started talking, because I think about that a lot. How do people perceive things? And I think that's part of anyone's art practice, because whether or not the artist intends for the work to be seen, it's going to be seen at some point by somebody, and they're going to have a certain perception of that work, and they're going to think about it in a certain way. But I think that it's interesting to think of it even beyond the obvious. How are people perceiving this thing? But so I think that's interesting. So thank you. Great. Well then, Beth, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
My name is Beth Lee, and I came through this through calligraphy, really. And most, as many calligraphers get into the art world, I came through reading, a big reader, and what we all refer to as OSA, office supply addiction. So the combination, got me into calligraphy, and then I quickly gravitated toward artist books. I really like the tactile experience of both doing the lettering and making the books. And then I also I think it's really important, the tactile experience of people who are experiencing the book, to be able to pick it up and hold it, which makes for problems with showing your work, but it's important to me. And I'm also drawn to the element of time, the unfolding of the experience as you open the book. And that's kind of driven some of my work. I think also I am also a musician, and I think that informs a lot of what I do. Playing music is a narrative in the way that a book is a narrative. It unfolds, and that has been something that I have spent some time thinking about and feeds into my work. I also, also with music, recording of music may be recording of music is a record of a performance, but I think a manuscript book is also a record of a performance. You can see what happened. And I think I'm mostly, it kind of, the content actually kind of goes between the mark making, which really grabs me, and then the text, the actual content of the text. So there's a lot going on in my studio all the time, and it's always really interesting in here.
Oh, that's great. Sorry, I got, if you can hear that out there, there's a couple dogs barking outside, so I'm sorry if that came through. Well, great, thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting thinking about, artists who are often sometimes writing something on the side or are playing music, and there's often, whether or not you came to art as, from somewhere else, or if you're a visual person and you play music or you write stories, it's interesting to see what else artists are doing, even if their main practice is more visual. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. So now we will take a look at some of your work. So we'll go back to Fern, and I will pull up some of your work here. And then, so Fern, I have both paintings here. And if you'd like to tell us a bit about the work we're seeing on the screen here. And if you want me to switch over to the next painting, just let me know.
Sure. Okay. So what I thought might be kind of a little bit fun and interesting is I gathered some of the things that I used. So this is actually the letter, the green letter that and it is kind of fun. I found it at a rare book and a fair in Greenwich Village in New York, and it was a stack of letters between two teenagers actually, and it was very sweet. And they were writing back and forth sometime in the 40s, and they meet one. It seemed I get very involved then in reading the letters and seeing what's going on and trying to understand what their life is like. And they were meeting at church once a week, and some weeks someone couldn't show up, and he's writing to her and he's saying, "Do you still love me?" You know, and it was very sweet because they're kids. And anyway, and the gray on the bottom is a recipe, and then there's various tickets. And I guess I spent a lot of time playing around with the different elements to try to make a composition, and just moving them around, and then trying to replicate the type of writing and the type, and if it's a typewriter or if it's handwritten is the letter. And so it's just been a lot of fun, really. So anyway.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, the fact that this is, because when we're seeing this on the screen, you can see the edges of things, and it looks like things are cut out and pasted down, but they're definitely just painted.
Yeah, so that's actually a problem, and I wind up people think it's collage, and it's not. And so when I enter different thing like this show, I try, if there's a space, to make sure I write, this is not collage, and I used to collage, but this is all hand done. And sometimes someone might, if you look up really close, it's not perfect, but that's why, because it's hand done. But anyway, very slowly. Anyway.
And we'll go to the other one here as well, so we can see the second one here.
Yeah, so here's, so these are part of, I have this enormous collection, and here's the book that I did, I worked from. The other thing that this is part of a series now that I call Tracking the Days. And when I had started this already, and then when COVID happened, particularly a cousin of mine but lots of other people on Instagram, a lot of people were tracking the days. They were saying day 1, day 2, day 3 in terms of our isolation, and when everyone was stuck at home. And I found it to be kind of poignant. And then I started realizing that what I was doing was tracking the days. So it kind of became its own series of where people are not just from, so I have quite a few of these where people are and this of course didn't happen. I mean, this diary is very old, but where people track their days. They thought, they were very conscious about thinking of what they did on what day, and how they spent their time, and what they thought about, and what they did or wore or anything. And so anyway, it became its own new series, and which I have quite a few of. And then there's I guess, you know, and so the blue book, which I didn't pull, is actually, it was a magician. I found it in a used bookstore, and it's a magician who decided to typewrite all his, in red on blue paper, all his magic tricks. And so that's all was also is very endearing. I've used it many times. So it's just, I like to think of it all as the grace of daily obligation, and how, you know, things, I guess the mundane things of every day that we all do. And I also found one other thought was that if you read a letter, for example, from a mother 100 years ago to their son, it sounds almost identical to the same letter that a mother might write to her son today. So there's a universality about it, and that again connects us all, whether, you know, I mean, so much has changed certainly in our life, but inside of us and in our human connections, actually not that much has changed. So anyway.
That's great. And I mean, with all these different elements coming together that all have different stories and backgrounds, you know, do you see then a sense of connection between them all, or is there a new meaning that's kind of made as you're bringing all these different things together?
Well, in bringing them together, the first order of business is that they have to visually work together. So I think they're all connected because they're all like paper keepsakes. And but then I have to make a painting. So I can't just, so in the end, it has to work as a picture. So I play with a lot of objects, and I tend more, my work has gotten more and more minimal. So I tend to start with a lot of things and gradually take away. And I sort of like to think of it in some ways, it's the antithesis of our digital age, because this was mundane things that people wrote letters or typed things, and yeah, so.
Great. Well, thank you. And I want to remind people out there, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to type them in the comments section as we're going along here. And we will be sharing links to things in there as well, so you can kind of keep an eye out for that. And I think we do have, let's see, we do have a comment from Monica Drake, who's in the show. And she said, "Thank you for sharing the items you worked from. I love old tattered things too. It's always interesting to find these treasures and create something new with them." So
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of those kindred spirits in this show as well. Thanks again. Great. All right. Well, thank you, Fern. And we will go on to Mariana.
Yeah. So so these cups came from conversations actually that I had with my parents. We were going through old family photographs, and we were looking at the people and talking about who they were. And I just realized how it only took like 1 or 2 generations to lose who these people were. We could identify like maybe 1 or 2 people in a group of people of these photographs, and they were all family members. And it just made me realize like how easy it is to lose these family stories, this family history. That it remains there in these photographs, but the actual knowledge gets lost unless it's, you know, told from family member to family member. And even then it gets mistranslated, and there's misinformation, and pieces of context are lost. And so from those conversations, I decided to start writing down these stories that my parents were telling me, because once my parents were gone, who would tell these stories? They would be lost as well. So, so I started writing down these stories, these family stories, and I started making connections to ceramic, that archival quality of ceramics. And I started also thinking of text as texture. text, creating texture and pattern. And so I ended up making plywood stamps using the handwritten stories that I had written that my parents had told me. So I had the handwriting laser cut into plywood to make them into stamps. And then I press the clay into the plywood, and that's what creates the texture, which is the text of the story, the handwriting. And it's my handwriting, which is kind of funny because my whole life, my handwriting has been really terrible. And I'm kind of sensitive about it, but now it's there on these cups, my handwriting, and these stories of my family. And some of the stories are a little bit personal and intimate, and they're not there fully. They're fragments of stories. They're not the complete story. It's not like you can look at a cup and know the whole story. They're kind of fragments in the way that they were told to me, fragments of stories. And so then the forms of the cups, what I'm really thinking about is the way the cups are used. They're used in these domestic environments in these very intimate ways. And so I'm referencing those domestic environments by making these little pillowy saucers. And that's also part of my obsession with just the tactile quality of clay, how the clay, before it becomes ceramic, it's so soft and plastic, and it just responds so well to your fingers. And there's so much that you can do with it. And then once you fire it and it undergoes that transformation to become ceramic, it changes completely. It's hard and permanent and can't ever go back to that soft plasticity. And so I really love that quality of clay. And so that I'm really kind of taking advantage of that by creating these little pillowy forms. And so what I like about these cups is that the text goes all the way up to the lips, so that when you're drinking out of that cup, you're feeling the words that are written on there. And I just like that, that like intersection of senses, right? That there's words that you're not hearing, you're feeling them, because they create a texture on the surface of the cup. And so that's really where this body of work came from, is these stories, the sense of loss of these stories being lost, and wanting to make them permanent in some way that will last.
And I really like the way that the way that you made the stamp for the text, the words actually pop off the surface.
Yeah.
It does give you that feeling, it would be on your lip as you're drinking it, and you could feel it on your hands as you're handling it.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about, too, the surface that you have, it's not totally solid, and you got that dark color of the text. It feels like old text, even though, you're telling us that you've written it, but it feels like it's something that's like on the back of a photo, or it's in a letter somewhere. So.
Yeah, it's worn away. It's for the action of the glaze breaking over the surface of the dark clay, gives it that kind of worn feeling, a little bit of weathering to it. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's like just about the same color as the piece in Fern's painting too. That the two
that green
talking back and forth. Yeah, great. Well, great. And something you said too about like people, feeling the words as they're using it.
Yeah.
That's the thing too, is people see something like what we're seeing on the screen, these cups presented on pillows, but the goal of this is to have people engage with them and use them every day too.
Yes.
So, they're great to look at on the shelf like that too, but they're wonderful to be able to use for sure. Yeah. So
thanks.
Yeah. And then we have a question from Mary McGuire. How do you get the text to be raised on the surface? So we kind of alluded to it, but we didn't quite describe it. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So basically, if I'm going to get really technical about it, I scanned the handwritten notes that I wrote into a computer, and I turn them into vectors. And basically, there's a computer program that connects to a laser cutter, which just uses a laser to cut into things. And I use that laser cutter to cut the text into plywood. And so that's basically how it happens. It goes from a written piece of paper into scanned into a digital thing that then gets translated into another physical, a stamp So it actually is the mirror of itself in the stamp, so that when you press the clay into it, you get the readable text. So it undergoes this like really fascinating process from a physical handwritten, piece of paper into a textured piece of clay. But I use the laser cutter is what I use to do that.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, great. So we will go on to Molly. And so Molly's work in the show is video. So what we have here is screenshots of the video, and we're going to put a link in the comments here where you can go watch that as well after the talk. So.
Okay. It's really exciting hearing everyone else talk. I keep wanting to take notes. This is all such interesting ideas. My piece in this show is a 5-minute animation based on an excerpt from Tender Buttons by Gertrude Stein, so a poetry book published in 1914. And I wanted to read a little bit of the text that it's based on, just a few lines, because it's this really interesting language, and partly it makes me feel shut out because it's not using grammar and text in the way that I would expect it to be used, but then partly it also draws me in because it feels like sort of a puzzle, like a thing that invites you to pick it apart. A little called Pauline. A little called anything shows shudders. Come and say what prints all day. A whole few watermelon. There is no pope. No cut in pennies, and little dressing, and choose wide soles, and little spats, really little spices. A little lace makes boils. This is not true. So it's based on this kind of language it's really playful, and it just is sort of rearranging the structures of what we expect to be seeing. So in approaching this project, I started getting really analytical about the language and looking for patterns. And there are a lot of repetitions of phrases and parts of words and letters. And there are also repetitions of concepts. And I started to notice text that related to printing and typography, which of course got me excited. And I also started to notice text that seemed sort of exaggerated or sensationalistic or unreliable. Like the image on there right now, there is no pope, or just this is not true. So I put this together to understand this piece of language as sort of a critique of the media, or an invitation to think a little more carefully about what prints all day, about what we're absorbing. So with that understanding of this language, I had a lot of trial and error about what form this was going to be, but eventually I settled on this like book type structure, and the animation itself is my hands tearing through it. I have an X-Acto knife in my fingers, and I'm pulling everything apart in such a way that all the lines are revealed in the right order. The typography is inspired by magazine headlines, newspaper headlines. I wanted it to be reminiscent of like rifling through like the feeling you find in a used bookstore, or when you find a magazine in a basement or attic, and it has all these different textures and it's a little bit faded. And for me, and probably a lot of people in this show, finding something that is really this exciting feeling of discovery. So I wanted to elicit that feeling as I rip through all these textures to reveal the poem. This was so it comes out looking like there's a lot of chance in it. It has these rips and it's not all controlled, but there was a lot of organization and planning behind where everything was. It was really nerve-wracking to sit down to cut through this thing because it had to be recorded in one take. You can't start ripping through the book and then mess up and then put it back together and start the video again. So I had everything planned out. I had diagrams of where each thing would appear and where each cut and rip needed to go, and I had it pulled up on a screen. in front of me as I like very methodically went through these choreographed motions. And then the video itself, the footage is sped up so that you're reading it at more like the speed you would read the actual language. Yeah, I guess so. My hope for this project is that what I got out of the poem is this invitation to like literally and figuratively dig through language and think about the layers and the patterns. And so I hope, even though this language can seem kind of inaccessible, I hope that this project is making it differently accessible and functions as a sort of invitation for people to think about language in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting because the words, in the original, like you said, it's not the way it's not like a easy thing to enter into. You really have to think about those words as they're in that sequence. And so that's how people are engaging with it. And it's like, you have to, I don't know, make sense of it, but then you can also just focus on what's right in front of you at that moment as well. And I think since the way that it's revealed, like if people go on and watch the video online, or if they come in to see the show, the way that it keeps revealing, you kind of focus on that, and then something new comes up, and it's really an interesting thing. And I think the way that it's sped up as well, it's kind of an unexpected delivery of this. And did you have, how many versions of this did you have to make in order to get this one take?
I guess it depends what you think of as versions. I had like prototypes where it's a totally different form that didn't work at all for the animation, and I put that aside. And then I have another whole version of this animation that I made and recorded, and it was like pretty successful, but there were a few, like I lost a word at one point and there were a few little problems. So I made edits and did it all again and expanded, and like, so it went through a lot of different stages of production.
Okay. And we should also say that this piece is award recipient of an honorable mention from the juror Scott McCarney. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And also, it's really, there's 3 different video pieces. Well, there's 4 pieces that have screens, and there's 3 of them that have sound with the video. And so there's 3 different kind of soundtracks playing, and 2 of them have like crinkling of paper and tearing and cutting, and then the other one has some fluttering of pages and kind of this classical music track. So it's a really interesting show to experience, audibly as well. So thanks for taking part in that part of the show too. So a collaborative effort to do that.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And then we go to Beth.
Well, this is a white piece of paper background. And then all of the counters were cut out of a single piece of paste painted paper that was gradated from the blue over to the brown. I guess I consider it a sort of an illustration of the poem. I don't know, should I read the poem? It's not that easy to read here. It's by Amy Lowell called Fragment, and it's called, and the text goes, "What is poetry? Is it a mosaic of colored stones which curiously are wrought into a pattern? Rather, glass that's taught by patient labor any hue to take, and glowing with a sumptuous splendor, make beauty a thing of awe, where sunbeams caught, transmuted, fall in sheafs of rainbows fraught with storied meaning for religion's sake." So you can almost read it, but it's really an illustration of the poem. And I think that whole idea of color transmuting from one to another. And I love the way that she talks about making a word take on a different hue as crafting a poem. And it was a little bit of insanity, I think, to decide to do this, but I like it. I liked the idea of almost doing what she describes doing herself in crafting the poem, almost doing the same thing to make this piece.
Great. And then we also have the second piece in the show here, which is a book.
Yeah, this was a poem that my father taught me when I was quite young. And it is a Sesquipedalian version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So the first, third, and fifth panels are the Sesquipedalian version, and the second, fourth, and sixth. So the first panel is scintillate, scintillate, globule, vivific, fain what I fathom by nature specific, loftily poised in the ether capacious, strongly resembling a gem carbonaceous. And then the second is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and it goes on. And I kind of enjoyed, well, first of all, this structure is a modified accordion structure. Hetty Kyle invented it, and it seemed like a fun structure to use for a fun book. So this was just a lot of play, really, as much as anything. It's Arch's cover stock, and then just white and metallic inks. I just kind of enjoyed the words, enjoyed the process, enjoyed this kind of funky structure that's unusual, and it's fun to open and shut.
Yes, and I can attest to that. It is very fun to open and shut.
So this is a case where you don't get as much of the experience by seeing it static this way as you would if you could actually hold it and open it up and watch it do its thing.
Well, great. And it's really interesting to see everyone who's talking tonight, all of you, the importance of the written word, and where it comes from, what it means, but then also how it plays out visually. It's just really interesting to hear, one by one, all of you talk about, similar things. So that kind of echoes what we were kind of talking about earlier when we started. So great. Well, great. I think that brings us to the end here, I think. So, let's see, Marjorie Pilgrinet says, I love this piece. So, about the book that was just up. So, I'd like to thank all of you for taking part in tonight's talk again. It was, educational and entertaining for me. I hope it was the same for everyone else. It's great to hear, like Molly, what you said. It's been great hearing the other artists talking too. So yeah, I think for all of you, it's like a little bit performance and just watching. So, so great. And Monica Drake also, again, love hearing from all of you. So, so great. Thanks again. And as I said before, anyone who is in the area and wants to come in and see the exhibition, we're doing that by appointment only. You can do that on our website, mainstreetartscs.org. If you're out of the area or just would rather participate with the exhibition online, that's also available for you at interactive.mainstreetartscs.org. We hope that you come visit us in some fashion, whether it's in person or online. The exhibition runs through August 7th, and we'll be on for the next 3 Fridays in I almost said February. I don't know if I'm just hoping for cooler weather. It is July, so for the month of July. We will see you next week, if not sooner, and take care out there.